So a very good morning to you all. We've opened the doors slightly early today because we're expecting over 100 people. So we thought we ought to open the doors early. So you're very welcome, but just bear with us if you would, just to give folks a chance to come on in. Obviously, Monday is a different day than norm for our CE webinars. It's normally a Friday lunchtime, but we're delighted that we've been able to bring this additional very valuable webinar. I'm sure you'll agree on this. Will be so. Abraham, if we've got the questions, we could ask folks to actually go to slido.com, and we've got some questions for you to answer. So while you're waiting for the presentation to start, maybe you'd go to slido.com and start answering the questions for today's survey. The hashtag LM240122 obviously is today's date. That's the code for Slido, and maybe answer the questions while you're waiting. As I say, we are expecting over 100 people today, so we need to give people a chance to sign up and come on in. And if you're anything like me, you slide in from one Zoom call to another. So we'll start just after 12 o'clock, if you don't mind, folks. You'll have to forgive me, by the way. I'm actually having to chair this webinar from my iPhone. I'm out in Bristol today on business, and my MacBook Pro is playing up, so I'm having to chair it from my iPhone, which is not ideal, but I'm sure we'll get by. So I make it a minute two, Abraham. Hopefully you'll agree. And we'll just let the clock tick round to about a minute past, I think. Just to give folks a chance to come on in. I'll have another sip of coffee in the meantime. People coming in all the time, you're very welcome. I know Monday is a strange day for us to be having our webinars, but such an important topic, we thought we must do it sooner rather than later. So delighted that David could give up his valuable time to share his knowledge with us today. We'll just give it another 60 seconds, David, and then we'll make a start for those that are here on time.
We're back in just 1 minute, Andrew.
Okay. Just look at my list to see who's in, who we're expecting. Won't be long, folks. I'll just give it till a minute past, just to give others a chance and fairness to come in, because the gates are open and people are flooding in. So while you're waiting, if you could go to slido.com, hashtag LM240122, and maybe answer the questions in the survey, that would be good. But it is a minute past, so I think we'll make a start and then others can join us. So very good afternoon to you as it is now. My name is Andrew Carpenter. I'm Chief Executive of the Structural Timber Association and also Constructing Excellence in the Southwest and the Midlands. And I'm joined in hosting this webinar by the other family of CE regions that you can see on the slide, together with the CIOB in the Southwest. We normally bring these to you on a Friday lunchtime, but this was such an important topic that we wanted to get it in sooner rather than later. And I'm delighted to say that David was able to give up an hour of his time to join us today. Now, before I introduce David, I've mentioned it once or twice, but if you could go to slido.com, enter the code hashtag 240-122. There is a survey. Go through the questions now. So folks can see the questions before I introduce David's presentation. So have we got the questions coming up, Abraham, perhaps, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So, very easy from there. Do you create, advise on, bid for construction frameworks? So that's the yes or no answer. Do you create, advise on, or bid for construction frameworks? And the second question, please, Abraham. How well do your frameworks work in relation to award of work? So how well do they work? Thank you very much, Abraham. How well do your frameworks work in relation to rewards and incentives for performance? And the next one, please. How well do your frameworks work in relation to collaborative delivery of improved value? Absolutely central to what we do within Constructing Excellence, as you will see. Thank you, Abraham. I believe there's one more. How well do frameworks work in relation to collaborative management of risks? Right. I think that's the last question. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Andrew, I think some people are not on mute. I've got some interesting noises from some delegates' offices.
Okay, in that case, I will ask folks, if you're not speaking, could only be David in a few moments. Could be my background noise, David, maybe. I'm in please go on. I'll be going on mute very shortly.
Okay.
So I'm delighted that Professor David Mosley is able to join us today. He told me in the session we had before we opened the doors that actually we're the first webinar that this important subject's being covered on. So delighted to say that CE is in there first. And I'm sure that we're going to find the next, well, it's a half an hour presentation, David, I believe, isn't it? Then we're going into a Q&A. So if you could use that Slido, hashtag LM240-122 to put any questions to David. And we'll go through the responses to the survey and also the Q&A after we've heard from David. So David, I'm going to mute myself so that the background noises may well now disappear, and look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thank you.
Right. Okay, let me just try and get there. Can everybody see that? I can't see myself at the moment, which is probably a good thing. But as long as people can see that, can somebody unmute just long enough to tell me that that is visible? Please.
David, I'm just seeing you at the moment.
Are you? All right, then that is the worry. Okay, let me just get this right. That is not what I wanted then. Okay,
no,
let's do a sharing of the screen.
I'm getting some notes on the participants. They're just seeing you at the moment as well.
No, I understand. I don't know why that is, but I will sort it.
Abraham, are you able to help?
No, it's all right. I can do it. I can do it. Just
okay,
give me one moment, and I will get these slides shared. And right, okay, hang on a sec. It's always like that. They share very well the first time, and then they don't. Right. Are we better off now?
Yes.
Yeah,
good.
we've got.
Now.
All
right.
Go to full.
How about that?
That's much
okay.
better.
Thank you, everybody.
Good to go.
Glad you can see me. That's super. All right. Look, I'm going to do a little bit of background. The construction playbook, it's been around for over a year now, with quite a bit of impetus behind it, with a comply or explain requirement, looking for better, faster, greener solutions, looking for a COVID recovery, and building the construction economy of the future. It required collaborative procurement through long-term contracts. It wanted to support and wants to support increased investment and innovation and new SME opportunities. And it focused, as you know, I'm sure, on requirements for modern methods of construction, digital information management, early supply chain involvement, and outcome-based performance measurement so that we can agree accurate costs, protect industry profits, pay promptly, allocate risk fairly, all good. Supported by a compact with industry, but how do we actually bring it to life? Can we really do that one project at a time? I think if we do it one project at a time, we are in the world of a Groundhog Day. We cannot just keep reinventing the wheel. We will miss opportunities. We won't learn, however brilliant each individual project, unless we connect them together. We lose our good ideas when a project team disbands. It's very frustrating. We limit our investment, our innovation, our motivation if we don't have the prospect of winning additional work. And we limit trust. You can't build trust from scratch with every new project team. Well, you can, but it's extremely hard work. So we all know, I hope, that the way out of this Groundhog Day is through a construction framework where we get multiple projects connected by multiple clients and multiple suppliers. But that only works if it's the right sort of framework, if it balances evaluation, if there's a proper pipeline of work and fair call-off, if there are fair incentives that people understand, and to get out of the Groundhog Day, if we have shared systems through which to improve value and manage risk and embed learning. And just to put that in context in relation to net zero, before we get into the detail, the playbook requires strategies for achieving these net zero targets by 2050, aligned under what they call an overarching sustainability framework. Well, people are going to put that in place. They have to have a medium through which to do that. They talk about systems and processes to ensure that projects and programs of work, deliver on the targets set. This is taking us to long-term commitments. They're looking for suppliers putting forward solutions accompanied by whole life carbon assessment. That will be demanding in the bid process as well as in the engagement process, far more likely to happen if there's a pipeline of work. And they focus quite rightly on the capability of SMEs to provide insights into modern methods of construction and innovative technologies and other ways to minimize greenhouse gases across the whole project lifecycle. All of those things depend, in my view, entirely on frameworks that integrate the innovations, investments, and workflow. So we've got multiple organizations and multiple projects working together. There isn't another realistic way to do it, because whatever brilliance is achieved in relation to net zero carbon within an organization, it's no use to us unless it's connected to other organizations and unless it is stable and sustainable in the way it's delivered. So we had an appointment. Back in February, I was appointed by the Cabinet Office to lead this independent review, and the outcome of that is constructing the gold standard. There were a lot of concerns that construction frameworks involve duplication, inconsistency, adversarial practices, and that there is waste, unnecessary waste, and an undermining of their potential. So the gold standard looks at frameworks, framework contracts, and also action plans to provide this sort of engine room, if you like, to drive improved value and safety, risk management, net zero, and industry profitability. I should say that when I produced this report, I looked to a clear review brief. I mean, I brought in 120 contributions. I'm sure there are people on this call who contributed. I developed 24 recommendations, but at the back of my mind was Lord Agnew's brief to create the components of a gold standard against which to measure frameworks and framework contracts and standard contract terms to support the new gold standard. So we're not in vague terms, we're not only in policy of corporate terms, we're talking about contracts as a medium to deliver these things, and then training packages to enable early adoption. And when the thing came out, and it was quite a long journey to getting support from Lord Agnew and from Steve Barclay as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, it came out with the government saying they're going to apply all the recommendations. They're going to support the gold standard because in their view, it will make sure that vital public sector developments spend their money well, and that projects are delivered successfully. So we seem to have got off to a good start. So I'm going to talk to you about what it is that we are addressing here. But before I do that, I also want to refer to some related guidance. I got two published in 2 months. Michael Gove announced this collaborative guidance in Parliament. You may have lost it in the other news that's flying around at the moment. But the techniques are strongly linked to the gold standard review in looking at avoiding a race to the bottom, ensuring that early supply chain involvement improves value and reduces risk, ensuring that a collaborative approach improves commitments and involves residents, and ensuring that a digital golden thread of data integrates design, construction and operations. So I mentioned that. I've actually, I think, created confusion with these two publications coming out so hard on each other's heels, but they speak to each other. And those working in the housing sector, I really would be grateful if you'd look at both, because I think they have something else that we can work on. But going back to the framework review, because these were confidential contributions, we got a lot of really interesting stuff, and the industry were very cynical about clients treating frameworks as a quick fix, about inconsistent and unfair pre-qual evaluation, contracts, endless bespoke contracts that people thought were frightfully clever, but the market has to read them all and work them out, see whether they are fair or not, and inconsistent measurement. They were very cynical about clients destabilizing relationships by shopping around, just looking for the lowest framework management fee. Clients who don't participate in strategic framework objectives, who don't even use their own frameworks, and clients who appoint team members from different frameworks or use consultants whom they know well and who do their best job, but who aren't actually interested in the framework objectives at all. They just want somewhere to get a contractor quickly. And they were cynical about these fragmented framework contracts that only really govern administration and risk transfer. And so we then had from clients as well, and clients, by the way, were calling for change. Nobody from the client side was saying everything was absolutely fine. There was a recognition of the need for better framework management, clearer net zero carbon commitments, certainly getting away from these speculative frameworks. There are 2,000 public sector construction frameworks out there at the moment. How do you work out which ones are good? The gold standard is intended to help you do that, but one of the fundamentals is 70% of the suppliers will not bid if the framework doesn't have a clear pipeline. And bearing in mind that the average cost for contractors to bid a framework is £237,000 and a top whack of £1 million, you don't want them bidding speculatively and wasting money on this, because that money has to come from somewhere else. There was, of course, as you would expect, a drive for better use of digital technology, for more active joint risk management and better SME support, linked partly to social value, and better use of whole life models. There was a very odd comment from some parties that whole life value is the unattainable holy grail of procurement. Well, that's not really good enough. I don't think it would impress anybody in the housing sector who wishes to avoid another Grenfell Tower, that a whole life approach is the unattainable holy grail, and we distinguish our capital spend from our operational spend. And there was a drive for collaboration across frameworks. But there's this strong collaborative theme that reflects the collaborative theme that has bred so much cynicism, because pricing collaboration is not new. We've been doing it for decades. Constructing excellence lives and breathes it. And the approach to frameworks in the mind of the authors of the Construction Playbook should be based around these collaborative principles that align objectives, success measures, targets and incentives to enable joint working on improving value, reducing risk. But these sort of principles, and I've been in this game as many of you have for a very long time, they seem to disappear into this Bermuda Triangle. We have this idealistic debate where we all want to shoot for the moon. We leave the room and then the cynical criticism starts. It'll never happen, you can't trust anyone else. And that leads us to these unrealized good intentions, and then we start all over again with another idealistic proposition. that isn't really going to cut it, and that level of cynicism should not be tolerated if, and this is the attempt in the gold standard, we can navigate through by not being idealistic, by being specific and practical in our collaborative systems, and by aligning commercial interests, firstly using evidence, there's a lot of case studies in there, and secondly by looking at the strategy through the procurement process, through the contracts to the management, linking them all together, not missing out the bit we're not interested in. A lot of people don't think contracts help, so they miss them out. A lot of important people think their job is done at strategy. A lot of procurement specialists focus on the selection and evaluation processes and step away. And a lot of management people introduce their own management world that may not owe as much as we would like to the earlier stages. This integration cannot be taken for granted. And so the recommendations follow what I've called the 4 I's. The structure follows the construction playbook to try and keep things clear. We're using the construction playbook for our foundations, but we're looking at strategy, and that to me is an honest and clear statement of intention. We're looking at procurement, which is clients issuing full and complete information, bidders issuing full and complete information, and it being adopted. We're looking at contracts as integration vehicles, not risk dumping. And we're looking at framework management through the lens of incentivization, which isn't throwing money at things. It is the techniques that will encourage performance and support performance. And as I say, we have case studies and very detailed guidance, which I hope will enable training. Quoted through the review, and I hope everybody is reading it or planning to read it, it is a cracking read, are over 50 examples of current good practice, which has made some framework providers very happy. But can I just say that that doesn't mean everybody, or indeed anybody, is achieving the gold standard already. All of the frameworks reviewed, and they know this, need to take urgent additional steps to achieve all of the gold standard recommendations. That's just a simple diagram of how these different elements are required to support this sort of universe of improving value and reducing risk. And I don't want to confuse things, but I thought it would be helpful to group the recommendations around these themes. So the R numbers are the specific recommendations in constructing the gold standard, following the construction playbook sequence. But as you can see, we start with strategy, and we need our sustainable pipelines of work to avoid wasted procurement cost and to improve supplier commitments. We need to start with pre-procurement consultation. We can incentivize innovation if we use outcome-based strategic briefs, but also if we explore and adopt strategic supplier proposals. It is difficult. It is difficult if you're appointing multiple suppliers to multiple clients to make sure that you pick up on all of the proposals they submit, or find a way to work with them to finalise those proposals. You don't necessarily take verbatim something that's coming in a tender, but nor should you lose it. The use of delivery models, very interesting work, of course, being done on the value toolkit here. This needs to be complementary to the gold standard in terms of the way that value informs strategies, procurement, contracting and management and call-off using delivery models. And cost can be better controlled, of course it can, through evidence-based benchmarks and these whole life should cost models. And then we move into procurement, and if we can award longer term call-off contracts, if there is the proper incentive of additional work, we will get better value. The market has always said this. It's not surprising. People need to plan ahead, and the client can help them. If we want investment in modern methods of construction and other off-site technologies, then we need to think how to integrate call-off of portfolios of work to provide continuity. We need transparency if we're going to avoid this cynicism, and if we're going to get away from this default position of a race to the bottom. We need to provide a fair return and to ensure prompt payment. These are basics, but frameworks can set up the rules that apply over a significant period. And then we need to standardize, and using PAS 91 or the Common Assessment Standard rather than somebody's bright idea for a new pre-qualification questionnaire is a fundamental. And of course, as we've all explored through various means, evaluating supplier proposals proportionately and consistently, getting away from cost only, but looking also at quality, social value, net zero, is a given. Now, you know, the review does not attempt to come up with a glib, all-encompassing answer to any of these points. It sets out principles and shows how frameworks can be used to deliver those principles. The detail of things like evaluation criteria need to be developed. But that is fine, because we're trying to develop a body of good practice. We're not doing this in one shot. There are some basics that have to be adhered to in the gold standard, but there is, of course, scope to develop these further. Then we come to contracts, and a standard form framework contract, expressly a standard form framework alliance contract, is seen as the way forward. I was very shocked by the bespoke and rather unexciting framework agreements that people sent me in confidence. They just seem to govern the admin. There's so much that a contract can do if it aligns people's interests and if it creates the transparency and the joint working that we've committed to. I've clarified and re-emphasised the supply chain collaboration systems that the government and industry approved back in 2014, and I've introduced case studies. Local government and housing providers can use these to bring in local supply chain members working with tier ones to re-engineer and improve tier two, and it really is you know, an open door if you want to push at it. The golden thread of digital asset information, when Lord Agnew launched this review, the gold standard last week, he expressed some concern that there isn't more understanding and adoption of BIM. And I think it is a bit of a parallel universe at the moment. We need intelligent multi-party contract solutions to draw the threads together. We can't be looking at a white-hot future of technology with just two-party contract protocols. We want to use early supply chain involvement, well understood, I'm sure, by everyone on this call, and we want integration in order to sustain a collaborative approach. So we have very clear contractual proposals, and as I say, we can't do what we want to do if it's all expressed in high-level objectives that are not translated into contractual commitments. And that's what I've seen time and again. Really good objectives, really hard work done by framework providers and managers, but they have to keep sort of begging people to do new stuff because they haven't got a contractual commitment. And they do revert to this divide and rule, piles of two-party frameworks that really don't offer us much in terms of a way forward. We've looked at these multi-party frameworks used on the trial projects, bespoke ones, of course, because there wasn't a standard form then, but Ministry of Justice, Hackney, Haringey, Surrey County Council achieved these averages of 18.5% agreed savings, some really good qualitative safety, social value, environmental improvements, all in the trial project case studies. And yep, the FAC1 that King's developed in consultation with a lot of people is a standard form framework alliance contract, and is indeed the only one present, and is recognised in the construction playbook. They're the ones who instigated this. They described it as something that can achieve many of the ambitions in the playbook. And the review showed us, you'll have seen, I'm sure, comments from Vinci and from Graham on the construction side, but also users such as Crown Commercial, Ministry of Justice, NHS, LHC, on frameworks worth over £57 billion. So you might as well start with that one if we're going to get going, rather than invent another standard form through another publisher. The really important bit is the doing of it. You know, we set everything up through the strategy, the procurement, the contracts, but we want these things to be adopted in practice. So one of the things that the FAC talks about and is a timetable of alliance activities, and with that concept in mind, I've talked about contractual action plans. Now, these apply, you know, whatever your form of framework agreement. If you've got the right objectives, you can, I would suggest, agree action plans now to convert these objectives into actions. Otherwise, we've got to wait for the next round of procurement. So we'd be waiting years before we put the gold standard into effect. To me, management needs to jump onto current frameworks and say, how can we do that? And I've given contractual systems that can be adopted through transitional alliances, through supply chain alliances that are consistent with public procurement. We've watched that done recently by Oxfordshire County Council with a net zero objective. That's just one of the, as a central point, managers can galvanise their frameworks, but basically clients need to invest in framework management so that it can demonstrate value for money. And support systems of joint risk management that we're familiar with, early warning systems at strategic level, not just think of this down in the sort of NEC, PPC project level, actually engage at strategic level. And that includes the risk of financial distress, the risk of insolvency. You can have an intelligent process, a supportive process, where supply chain members are vulnerable. But again, based on sharing the information and taking the action. And to support our supply chains and support our frameworks, we need collaborative systems. Core group decision making is recommended so that we've got management supported by all of the parties involved, the clients and the suppliers and the supply chain, and indeed the framework providers, rather than just a cold thumbs up, thumbs down system, or indeed just a load of paper KPIs. We need a living system of engagement by the parties involved. So that's a bit of a brief run through the stages of the 4 I's. And bearing in mind, as I say, the government have accepted these recommendations. So we're in a good place to get started. And the recommendations for adoption and implementation say that the government should use the features of frameworks, framework contracts, action plans to measure playbook implementation, and they should do so on a comply or explain basis. Now that sounds very harsh, but it's not an option, it's not guidance, because we've got a lot of guidance. We've had guidance on collaborative procurement since the early 1960s. And I think we're all aware that there's only partial adoption. If we're translating collaboration into commercial propositions that are essential to deliver net zero carbon, and indeed to deliver efficiencies, modern methods of construction, social value, then we need something more than just guidance. So this comply or explain basis is what's recommended, and from the user's point of view, that these gold standard features are adopted by clients when they're looking to what is offered by a framework provider, and by suppliers when they're being invited to bid. In the 2,000 frameworks on offer, they do not all come anywhere close to the gold standard. And now we have objective criteria for distinguishing between them. We're also suggesting that the government should require all public sector frameworks to prioritise safety, net zero carbon, and the compact with industry, which, just to summarise, itself looks to long-term relationships, fair returns, equitable risk treatment, rewards for faster, better, greener delivery and collaboration at all levels of the supply chain, and that's what led to so many people signing up to the construction playbook. That in addition to these requirements, that the government supports adoption of the gold standard frameworks, contracts and action plans through training, guidance and shared experience. Now we see where that goes. I don't have detail on that. That is in the hands of the government. And also I would suggest, I hope in the future, in the hands of organisations like Constructing Excellence. But I'll draw this to a close by suggesting that I hope, given the 120 contributions for which I am so grateful, and on which this report is based, I hope that constructing the gold standard will enable clients and suppliers to fulfil the potential of public sector construction frameworks. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much. So I'm sure that for those of us involved with construction, just outlined will very, very, very prominently during the next 12 months more. What I'd like to do, if we may, is just go through the survey that we asked a series of questions earlier on. Let's just have a look at the results, shall we? Do you create, advise, or bid frameworks? So pretty much everybody does. Just 4% don't on the call. So obviously everyone that's listening in, not surprisingly, is very much involved in what we've had to talk about. So the next question, please, Abraham. How well do your frameworks work in relation to the award of work? Pretty middling ground there, I would think, David. Would you agree?
Yeah, interesting.
I don't know. Yes, I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on those results. It's sort of fairly evenly spread, isn't it, really? With the middle grounds, they're prominent, but not by much, only a third. Let's go to the next question, if we could, please, Abraham. How well do your frameworks work in relation to rewards and incentives? Nobody at 5, but more emphasis at 4 there. But again, it's quite an even split, isn't it? Across the piece. I'm sure you won't be surprised with that. And the next question, please, Abraham. How well do frameworks work in relation to collaborative delivery of improved value? Again, it's that middling ground with a fairly even spread. So, yeah, thank you. And I believe the final question, slightly lower there, averaging at 2, and this is talking about management of risk. But it's quite an even spread, isn't it, David, throughout all the questions?
I think what is interesting to me is that there is, I mean, it may be because of the people who participate in constructing excellence are by definition out there in trying to do the right thing, that this seminar attracts people who are already engaged on seeking best practice, and therefore, are more positive than the wider marketplace suggested, during the review process. So that is good. That is encouraging.
Okay. Right. Well, what we'll do now, David, if we may, is go to the questions. I've had a few questions posed on the chat box in Zoom. I would ask, ladies and gents, if you wouldn't mind, because then we can put the questions up on the screen. So if we could have one time, Abraham. Number one, David, in your experience, how do you get clients to engage earlier with the delivery team without losing competition whilst getting best value?
Yeah, I mean, this is fundamental, because everybody says, oh, well, I'm not going to share anything because I'll lose my competitive advantage. And that just blights the whole process. So we talk collaboration, but then we don't do it because, oh no, that would spoil our competitive advantage. Either we're going to do this stuff, and what I mean by this stuff, I mean improved efficiency, I mean net zero carbon, I mean abolishing modern slavery, delivering social value, actually investing in our future, what the McKinsey report called rewiring the contractual framework, or we're not. And the answer to your question is we clarify what is to be shared and what is not. If you take, for example, I don't want to talk about FAC1 today, but if you take that, it treats as confidential the proposals put forward by contractors and consultants at the bid stage, and then creates the machinery for the managers to work out what needs to be shared across all of the suppliers and clients, and then as a matter of consensus seeks to undertake that sharing. So it's a balance. The idea that every proposal is a great secret and needs to be held close to the chest of an individual client or an individual supplier is a fallacy. But if you're, Laing O'Rourke, and you've invested in factories and you've got special solutions, or you're Stuart Mill and you've got, so of course you own IP that you're not going to give away. But there are things that belong to people and that define their unique selling point, and there are things that don't. And the case studies shared in constructing the gold standard show how contractors, clients, consultants can be persuaded to share. I mean, if you look at the Ministry of Justice 4 New Prisons programme, that takes 4 major contractors. They're only going to get 1 prison each, but they have to share their specialist off-site approach to their supply chains. They've got enough work. They're part of an overarching Crown Commercial Framework Alliance. They've got enough work, they've got enough motivation to overcome that reluctance. So, I mean, it's a terrific question, even though it's anonymous. Terrific question, and it goes to the heart of what a framework really ought to do.
And I wonder, David, whether the missing word, certainly I've experienced since Latham and Egan, is the word that's missing is trust.
Well, I think my problem with trust is it means different things to different people.
Well, that's true.
You know, that is part of the Bermuda Triangle. If only we trusted each other, which means if only you would change your behaviour and I could stay the same because you've kind of let me down, is where we go. So I don't think the missing word is trust. I think you earn trust through what you do, and you sustain trust through the machinery of things like joint decision making, early warning of disputes, recognition of good performance and fair treatment. You're not going to get trust from a contractor if you pay them late. You're not going to get trust from a client if you stab them in the back. So I know absolutely what you mean, Andrew, but I believe that we need to step beyond a good feeling into a set of really serious mechanisms to deliver these things we want to deliver. Otherwise, I've seen these examples from terrific commitment from framework providers, but as I say, they end up sort of begging people, please do the things that we said we were trying to do at the beginning, because we haven't actually translated those good aspirations into a system of improvement.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question then, please, Abraham. We'll get there in a minute. Thank you. On the question of sustainable pipeline of work, has any research been conducted on funding from central government in terms of capital investment?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I think that it is very interesting to look at a long-term pipeline and how absolute the guarantee is. There's no doubt that organisations that control a capital pipeline long time, say, like Anglian Water, these, utility providers, how they control their funding because they control the supply that gives rise to the income that gives rise to the funding. We all worry that government, money is moved around, but again, I don't see how that should stop us. We've got a commitment from the government to all frameworks having sustainable pipelines of work, and that means funded. Then the next question is, what are you going to do about it, government, in order to bring this to life? It doesn't mean that Rishi Sunak has to promise money over 10 years that hasn't been fully allocated yet. It means that, when the Ministry of Justice sets up its new framework, which it's doing at the moment, it shows what money it intends to spend and what preconditions apply to that. And if it could lose all its money after 1 year, then it's going to get a 1-year commitment from bidders. We've got to get the message across, but it has to be a factual message rather than just sort of blurting out a promise. So, I don't know about the research. I'm more interested in the clarity. If we get the clarity, then we can very soon find out whether that is sufficient. I still remember in the depths of the recession after the global financial crisis, Surrey County Council said, look, we can find £100 million over 5 years, and in return we'd like you to give us £120 million worth of work, but we will give you a 5-year commitment. Now that was really interesting to me because I don't know that those local politicians were in a position to do that, but they did it. And I think that, again, the value proposition can be enhanced by the marketplace showing what can be done if the money is committed.
Thank you. Next question, please, Abraham. So not sure how this supports SMEs unless they are named in the framework as part of the contract. So
Okay, I think you, I don't know if the questioner has read Constructing the Gold Standard yet, but the section on SMEs is very clear that, you know, there are SMEs, and of course it's a broad church, but let's take specialists, and let's take in particular local and regional specialists. Let's link those two together. You can construct a framework not to name them, but to identify their strengths. And if you take a local or regional company, it has a better carbon footprint. It has a better understanding of the local and regional environment in which it's working. It has a better understanding of stakeholders. So you can pick these things up and express them in objective terms. So that's number one. But number two is this supply chain collaboration concept. And I'm going to go on about this till I'm blue in the face because it works. If you appoint your tier ones, but do not take as a given their tier 2, tier 3 supply chain members, you know, those are not the last word in this. Every tier 1 contractor has a preferred supply chain and has invested in those relationships, but that's not the last word. If you sign them up to a concept to jointly revisit the best supply chain proposals, they run supplementary competitive processes and consultation with client participation, that is taken out of public sector procurement into a much more iterative and interesting process. And you find out exactly what SMEs can bring to the party, and you bolt it in. And it is not nomination. It is not to say either the client names or the contractor names, end of story. It is to actually say, hang on, if we're collaborating, this is an area where we can collaborate, and where the case studies returned by Hackney and Haringey, by Ministry of Justice, by Surrey, by Oxfordshire, although that's not in the review yet, but it's coming soon, all show it can be done. But somehow people don't go that route because they think it's too good to be true. They think contractors will not agree to review. Well, they do. So to me, that's detailed in the review. With more detail in the annex. I really would like people to scrutinise that. By all means, challenge it, but this does offer something different for SMEs and through a number of different routes.
Thank you, David, and that will be particularly interesting to the Constructing Excellence Club network, of course, which deals with predominantly SMEs. So thank you for that. Now then, the next question: is there a commitment to transparency, as that is a key part of collaboration?
Absolutely. And you know, to transparency on cost, transparency on award procedures, transparency on performance measurement. That to me is why you need a multi-party contractual model. If you have separate two-party contracts, everybody thinks someone else is getting a better deal. Everybody is suspicious. You don't see that there is a level playing field. So where there have been multi-party contracts, yes, you know that some information is confidential, but you then have a medium for liaising with each other, for seeing the transparent processes for what they are, not suspecting that there's some backdoor dealings. I wholly agree with that. Again, it is a matter, as the review attempts to do, to break that down into the things we're being transparent about and how that works.
So the next question, please, Abraham. So, was any research conducted on smaller local authorities and the impact on management costs to administer a gold standard framework? And are there any?
The way this was approached, and I have to say I did this for no money. So there's a point at which to say I did this for free. A small amount of money went to King's Research, and it was a small amount. I was asked to do this, and I was asked to do it around 10 framework providers, and I chose to broaden it out. And the first thing I did was to bring in all the members of the National Association of Construction Frameworks, who access many small local authorities through their work. And the second thing I did was to invite participation from a number of clients that include small local authorities, as well as a whole range of businesses, including SME contractors, and indeed, you know, small firms of architects and engineers. So I did my best, but I was under time pressure, and I needed to get going. So the scope for research in the way that, would be fascinating was limited. And, I was asked, for example, not to major on the housing sector. Now, I've been working on frameworks when I was in private practice, excellent frameworks that frankly started with the housing sector. Everybody talks a great deal about the achievements of infrastructure clients. The voluntary housing sector was fantastic. But, I was told, well, look, if you do that, you will be dealing with hundreds of providers, and you won't be able to stay at the strategic level that the review started at. So, I'm very open about this. I did what I could, and I certainly wanted to listen. I listened to small local authorities as examples, and it was those who put their names forward when they heard about the review, and I listened to views expressed, if you like, through the intermediary of those NACF providers. But so hopefully we've got some recognition of the interests of those clients, even though we didn't have separate research into them.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Have we got any more questions, Abraham?
We have some on the chat.
Okay, let me just go to the chat then. I did ask those on the chat to actually transfer them, but obviously that's not happened. Right, let me just see where we are then. Right, so I've got one from Graham O'Doherty. David, are you aware of any guidelines for procurement which specifically highlight the different forms of MMC and when the best time to engage with the supply chain? The question stems from my experience of clients, employers, agents, and QSs in general having a very poor understanding of how to procure for different forms of MMC to gain best value for the holistic team. There's a mouthful. Yeah,
and I think this is really interesting, isn't it? Because this is not a technical review. People, I imagine, expected me as a lawyer to major on contracts. I've swum upstream to strategy, and I've swum downstream, in terms of time to management. But it's a process review, and the technical comparison of MMC methods and the excellence of people's research has to come out through that process. So no, I am aware of different research conducted in relation to MMC. I'm aware of, obviously Mark Farmer's reports, and I'm aware of Laing O'Rourke Centre in Cambridge looking at MMC. There's a lot of good stuff around. There's a lot of good stuff done by Constructing Excellence, and it's very on point. But to me, it's not a report about comparing the methods of MMC. It is a report about getting them in front of us and from the people who provide them. So that has to be part of a procurement process, because nobody can make a case for single source selection in the public sector. So we have to develop systems which, to my mind, have to be strategic. We're not going to support MMC on a single project basis. So we need frameworks to get this portfolio of work, and then when it is a matter of evaluating what people can offer in return for a portfolio basis, in return for a pipeline of work, clearly the brief for the framework needs to address the client's technical requirements as well as the other priorities we've described, and clearly the challenge in the evaluation criteria is to work out which is better. But in this review, you cannot go into that level of granularity. It is a massive subject in its own right. But we've got to start. We've got to start with a robust process and the promise of a long-term stream of work, and we're not getting that. We're still going project by project, and with respect, we still have many clients who don't use frameworks properly and just see them as a corner shop for buying a pint of milk. They don't see them as a long-term investment. That is a real worry. If you read an interview the Building magazine published today with me, I've seen the comments from Dean Fazackley of LHC about clients just saying, no, just give me access, you know, single stage D&B, use my own consultant, just give me access to your framework. That's no use. It's not going to help us make progress.
Okay. Another question on chat, David. How do you align outcomes with supplier who is constructing a building? School has outcome of getting better results over a 10-year period. How does the supplier who is building the school align that outcome with their performance?
Well, I'm not sure I've got that point. Let me try and understand that. We're aligning different commercial interests. The client needs a school. The supply chain, the suppliers need profits, and they need a pipeline of work. The objectives are, in both cases, building schools, you know, that perform. And if we have multiple schools, we have the scope to standardize and the scope to improve as we go forward. And if we recognize profit margins and agree them separately, and if we recognize risks and manage them jointly, and if we set up a reward system linked to the client's expectations, reasonable expectations, that includes stakeholders, then it seems to me that is the level of alignment that is achievable. But we're not even out of the starting gate here. There is this assumption that clients cannot be relied upon to support their own frameworks, that they will not invest in or support the management of those frameworks, that is just an admin role, that we will slip into the long grass of the many issues that will arise on site on every project, and lose sight of the overarching issues, and that is always going to be a risk, by the way. But if we don't have professional framework managers, you know, we're in the hands purely of the individual project managers with nobody to remind us of how to align the strategic objectives. So, you know, the systems are set out there, and I think they stand up on any type of project. But it is important that the pre-framework consultation looks at what is possible and what is expected, and that the rules of long-term engagement are actually respected and are not translated into, you know, little fragmented individual project issues, you know, where we can do something a bit better.
Okay, another one around smaller local authorities here, where they say resources are low. Has any research been conducted as to when having an individual framework is cost prohibitive?
Well, yeah, all the time. I mean, you know, this is why do people feel they have to have their own frameworks all the time? You know, there are, I mean, you look at what Crown Commercial have set up, look at what National Association of Construction Framework members have set up, what LHC have set up. They're specifically set up to enable access and to enable flexibility for the benefit of so that clients don't have to fund their own framework. And this is really tricky, I think, you know, because of course there will be areas where a separate framework is justifiable, but there are many where they're not. And I think clients need to be a bit more demanding. Their procurement teams, their legal teams can bring other people's frameworks to life. They don't need to reinvent them. You know, I feel that again, it's the same with, you know, with the lawyers. You know, there's stuff in here about legal and procurement professionals. You know, nobody's taking bread out of their mouths, but they're not serving the marketplace if they say, well, the only way that we'll keep our jobs is to recommend another new framework to make this individual client feel special. You know, you can tune in properly to available frameworks, and they are the best ones, are designed to enable the client calling off to use its professional expertise to bring them to life. And I'll give you the example. Sorry, I'm not promoting Crown Commercial here, but it springs to mind. You know, that Ministry of Justice sub-alliance, through, by the way, an FAC within an FAC, enabled Ministry of Justice to do all of its Ministry of Justice things within an overarching framework created by Crown Commercial. Ministry of Defence are using it again. Now, those are clients who feel they're pretty special. And yet they can find a way, for a number of projects to say, okay, we can work within this machinery to add the things that matter to us. So, I know we could go into a debate around a framework within a framework, and I'm well aware of the sensitivities to navigate there. But I think my starting point, Andrew, would always be have a really good look these days at what other people have tried to create for your benefit before going and doing your own thing.
That's good advice. We've got 3 minutes left, David, so we'll whip through the answers if we can very quickly.
I've got, Andrew, before you do that, someone's got this on, Rob Lamb has got this one on the screen, and I just wanted to answer it.
Okay.
And so, Rob, I've said don't change them. Firstly, when it comes to standard conditions of contract, the playbook is clear. It is neutral vis-a-vis choice of JCT, NEC or PPC. It says don't change them, and I endorse don't change them. But my real point is don't rush to your NEC, JCT, PPC. Look at what the framework contract can do and use a standard form framework contract. And look at that strategic machinery. That's my answer. Sorry, Andrew, I just wanted to get that.
No, just to get all the questions if we can. There's one here with a political sort of slant. What you're describing appears to be a 10-year plan of commitment to continuous improvement and commitment to the core principles. How do we ensure the political brackets and economic cycles do not derail these?
Well, someone put this very directly in the launch event last week to Matt Brown of Cabinet Office, saying, have you consulted with the opposition? He said, well, look, we're civil servants. We serve the government of the day. But, my point, I suppose, is, again, coming back to, say, the National Association of Construction Frameworks and its regional spread, it is serving and linked to local authorities of every political persuasion. So I see this as a non-political initiative that happens to have come out of the current government. I think that the industry and the individual clients all need to make it work. There is absolutely no reason for it to be more attractive to one type of client or another. I think the economic cycle can be an excuse for all sorts of old nonsense, but I must say the worst times of the economic cycle sometimes bring the most imaginative proposals. Sir Michael Latham being the first person there. I'm well aware of the awful supply chain shortages and issues that people suffer and the ups and downs. I could only say that, yeah, I agree, long term is what we want in order to stabilize these variables. It's a challenge. But it only speaks to the importance of frameworks as the medium to meet the challenge.
Well, if everyone doesn't mind, it's turned 1 o'clock, and I'm going to leave the last question to Martin Jones, who is a long life supporter of CE principles and has been working with Constructing Excellence in the Southwest for 20 years. It's 3 questions in one, really, David. The principles have been very much part of ICT paradigm since the late 80s. Is this another indication of construction's reluctance to change, is the first question. Then, do we have too many frameworks, is the second question. And have frameworks inhibited or supported innovation in construction? So 3 for the price of 1 there, David.
Yes, and no. There is a reluctance. I think there's reluctance of clients and reluctance of contractors. It's my Bermuda Triangle, Martin, that it's who goes first and can I rely on the others, which brings us exactly to Andrew's point on trust. There are many answers to the trust question, but this is offering, I think, greater clarity. I've now forgotten the second and third questions. Are there too many frameworks? Yes, there are, and hence the need to sort the sheep from the goats according to objective criteria. What was the last question?
Let me just go back to the chat box. So is it another indication of our reluctance to change? And has it inhibited supported innovation?
That's it. Frameworks I've worked on, in private practice and in academia, over 100 frameworks, collaborative frameworks. And I've seen what people can do pursuant to those. I mean, that goes back 20 years, as I'm sure your experience does. You know, this is not new in terms of unheard of. It is new because it's gaining momentum and attracting new analysis. So I have seen fantastic examples of how frameworks have inspired innovation. And I really can't see, I mean, every organization innovates, every commercial organization should innovate. To me, this is the delivery of innovation. And as I've said, the attraction of investment in innovation by showing what rewards are possible. So as I say, the answer is yes and no, because poor frameworks really poison the well, and we need to weed those out. Good frameworks, I think, are definitely a medium for investment in innovation.
David, thank you for that, and thank you for the last hour. Very useful, very valuable, I'm sure, to everyone that's listened in. And we will make this presentation available to others that weren't able to join us today. So if you want a CPD certificate for what you've heard in the last 60 minutes, then you need to go to mypast.co.uk, as you can see, and the reference there to get your certificate is on the screen, so I won't read that out. Also, would you go to slido.com and fill in the exit survey? That would be very useful. Coming up on Friday, very interesting. This is something that was brought to my attention late last year. But as we talk about sustainability, this is a way we can become sustainable in terms of site huts and so on. So if you're involved in using any form of site huts and so on, then this will be of interest to you on Friday. What I'd like to do now is thank Abraham at Leaders Meets for hosting it. But most important, David, thank you so much for your time. I know you're such a busy man. So to give up an hour is very, very useful to thought. And I'm sure the content of what we've heard in the last 60 minutes will feature strongly in our CE agenda for the coming 12 months. So just leaves me to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day, folks. Thank you very much
indeed. Thanks for the questions. Great questions. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.